Hello, and welcome to the 2021 PLM Virtual Conference. This session will be focused on classification in Windchill. My name is Nick Samarja. I'm a product manager here at PTC responsible for core Windchill. Today, I will be walking you through some slides and a demonstration inside Windchill around parts classification. Let's first start off with a 1,000-foot view of what classification is. If you look around you, classification is everywhere. Everything from the computer you are looking at to the components inside to even you. Classification is a means of identification and generalization of really anything. So to put into perspective how important classification is, imagine shopping on Amazon, but every single product they have is sitting in a database pool and you have to sift through an unorganized catalog of millions of products before you find that blue office chair you were looking for. That could take some time. So to relieve that unwanted experience, people came up with a hierarchical approach using classification, a way to organize and identify things into buckets based off commonality in characteristics. So let's take a look and see how this applies to engineering. Here I have a snippet from a common component library. You can see how there are three large buckets: fastening and joining, piping, tubing, hose and fittings, and power transmission. For this example, I will be looking for a certain screw. I would come in here and click on screws and bolts. Now I get presented with more options, and you will notice as we drill further into the category, objects become more and more specific. Now I know I'm looking for something like a hex head screw, so I'll click on that and I'll get presented with a catalog of different hex head screws. If I go one more level deep, let's say this high strength grade 8 steel hex head, we get presented with our final layer of classification. And now we can browse through a much smaller list to find that desired piece we're looking for. You can see how this would be tremendously difficult to navigate without some sort of structure and commonality. Let's take a look at how classification in Windchill has an effect on your business. Windchill allows you to search and browse for parts in a fast and efficient manner. It allows you to standardize on part classification and bring a formal and repeatable process to your users. This ultimately influences better decision-making and saves us money. Our customer Weatherford experienced a 12% reduction in part count and told us classification of data breaks down silos of information. It gets everyone on the same page internally and throughout the supply chain. Here we have some capabilities and their benefits, starting with configurable classification schemas. Here we allow our customers to create and build their own classification schema tailored to their business needs. We feature automatic part and document naming. So here you can set some logic that enables attributes to reflect within the name of the part or document you are creating. So you can have some standardization around naming throughout your enterprise. We have robust searching capabilities to encourage part reuse. Localized information gives us accuracy across different regions and the ability to do bulk editing via import-export. So now let's transition to a demonstration within the software. We'll start off at our Windchill homepage. First, we're going to browse through and navigate to, our common component library. We'll hit on our folders. And once we're within our folders, we can start by creating and classifying our very first part. Once we select on parts, we get to insert our different attributes. But first, let's jump to our part classification structure. From here, we can search within our part classification structure by searching within the address bar. We can also expand each of these branches and start browsing through the tree. Start browsing through our mechanical branch, our bearings, our screws. And for this demo today, we'll be classifying our parts under pan head screws. But first I'll hit cancel and just show you another way we can quickly classify this part just by searching it. So we search for pan and we select our pan head screws. Next, we can come in here and insert more attributes such as name and number. So I'll add in an arbitrary number here with zeros and ones. And we'll give this a name. We'll title it BOM1. Once we hit next, we get presented with our classification attributes to fill in. From here, I can add and insert my material. So I have a list of different materials to choose from. Our different threads, we can do partial or full. And we can start filling in some other attributes like length. We'll do at 2.125 inches. Our maximum drilling thickness we'll do at 1/4 inch, and our thread diameter at 0.5. And finally, we can do a thread direction to the right. Once we're done with that, we can hit OK. But the system now notifies us that we actually have a part within the system that's existing, and it has similar characteristics. So if I start to scroll over and I can start to expand my classification attributes there, let me resize this window, make it a little bit bigger. You see our classification attributes there, and we can see similarities, similar thread diameter, thread direction, maximum drilling thickness. So we can go ahead and jump to that part just by clicking on this I bar, or we can just hit cancel and change some of our attributes so we're not adding duplicates to our system. So just for demo purposes, I'll change some attributes here for ceramic, change our length, and our thread diameter. Okay, once we've done that, we have now successfully created and classified our first part. Now, another way we can classify parts is by classifying multiple parts at once through our new multiple parts wizard. From here, I can select my part. We'll hit next. And we get a few rows of parts we can start creating. But for demo purposes, I'm just going to get rid of a few rows here and narrow it down to just do parts. So once I have my 2 parts here, I'll set my classification attributes for it. We'll come in here and we'll do, once again, our pan head screw and fill in my attributes. Okay, now that we fill in our pan head screw classification attributes, I can come in here and now we can add a name and a number to each of these parts. So just quickly here, call this one bomb 2 and this one bomb 3, and we'll give this some arbitrary numbers. Typically a system may auto-generate numbers, but I have that preference set off in my environment. So I'll just add some numbers here and I'll hit finish. Now I've successfully classified and created 2 more parts within our system. We'll just quickly jump here to make sure that everything looks good. We see on the bottom left-hand side there, our new classification attributes do reflect what we put in. Now, a third way we can create and edit and classify parts is through our import-export. So this is a way we can sort of do some bulk editing. First, I'll start off by narrowing down my list. Get rid of my CAD document there. And I can export this to an importable spreadsheet. Once I'm here, I'm prompted with a couple options. So some export options. I want to do part. We'll add a file name to it. We'll call it bomb export. And when we hit OK, the system downloads it locally here. And we can just quickly open that up into Microsoft Excel and start editing our parts. We can see we have some information there, attributes, metadata, locations where these parts are stored. If I scroll over to the right here, I'll get presented with our classification information, such as what's it classified at, our classification attributes, and we can edit all those. But we'll just come in here and take one of these parts and change the material. Okay, once that's saved back to our local drive, we can come here and now import that spreadsheet. Okay, once we've added our file, we can choose different import actions. You can see the 4 available there. And then we want to validate the spreadsheet, make sure there's no invalid characters or any syntax errors. Once we get the successful validation, we hit finish. And the system then is going to update the parts that have been edited and changed. So this was the part we edited. So let's jump in here. We can see the material has changed from brass to bronze, and it's reflected within the page. Now let's take a look and see how we search and browse for these parts. First, we'll start off with searching. So we'll go to our advanced search page, select on our part. That brings in our classification search. We can select our classification tree. We can run a search for screws, or we can open up the magnifying glass and browse. Down here, we have our different attributes. You can see the different attributes available, as well as the classification attributes. We have length, material, maximum drilling thickness. Down here, we have thread diameter, direction, and threading. So for this, we're going to run a search on a full thread. So we'll come in here and type in full. But before we run the search, we're going to want to save this in case we're running this search pretty regularly. We can just come right back to it and run the query. So we'll call it screw full thread, save it, we get confirmation that it's saved successfully. Then we'll jump over to our search history and saved searches. And we see our screw full thread is now there in our saved searches, and we run the query just by clicking on it. See, we get yielded with 27 objects. We can see the criteria which that saved search falls under: threading, partial full. Now let's jump over to our classification explorer and take a look how we can browse for our different parts. If I actually come in here and choose my different classification trees, I can actually come in and bring in my documents. So just like with parts, you're able to search, browse, and classify documents as of Windchill 11.2. So we can browse through our document tree here, but let's just run back to our part classification. So a couple different ways we can navigate through our tree. On the left-hand side here, we can scroll down here and open up these branches and run through the nodes this way, or we can come to the middle there and jump through our catalog and explore our tree with the illustrations available there. So after we click on mechanical, we get presented with our next level down. So we see screws, rivets, pins, washers. If I click on screws, we'll start seeing similarities here. We have our pin head screws, hex screws, drilling screws, etc. So once I'm here, I can actually run the search, run sort of a general search on just the screws classification. So we can see we have 43 objects here, everything ranging from those pin head screws to the hex screws to the drilling screws. So now we want to filter those in. On the left-hand side here, we have these things called facets. Facets are really important for narrowing down your search. This is a rather small query result, but typically, we may have hundreds, if not thousands of parts. So these facets are really important to narrowing down your list. So we can see we went from 47 objects to 18 just by choosing a new classification. We can also move the slider over and create a minimum maximum thread by sliding the slider, or we can add numeric values in the text box. Or we can apply something like a thread direction here. So we'll limit it to just the thread direction to the right. And you can see with just 2 filters, we went from 47 objects down to 5. So you can see how quickly we can narrow down our results by applying facets. So this is our BOM 1, the very first part we created. Should look pretty familiar. So now we've gone through how to search and browse for our classification parts. Now let's take a look and see where that administration is done and where you create those structures and those attributes. Here, this is where you define your classification administrator group. And here's where those administrators actually work to create that structure, to create those attributes, to create auto naming, and things like that. When I open up my branch, again, you'll start seeing similarities under the mechanical tree. We have screws, rivets, washers, all which you've already seen, and our different classification structures up there. So how do you create a classification structure? It's actually quite simple. You come here and click on Create New Namespace, and we'll name it BOMFriends, give it an internal name of BOM for BOM, and a display name, we'll call it BOMFriends as well. Once we hit OK, we can see we can add more properties to it, descriptions, keywords, images, and schematics. But let's start off by adding branches to this structure. So this is our top level sort of BOMFRIENDS branch. And now we want to start adding nodes and branches underneath it. So you would come in here and create a child node. We'll title it BOM node 1. We'll have the display name as BOM node 1 as well. Again, you can add any descriptions, keywords, schematics. So now that we've created our first branch, we can see, again, we can add properties to it to further define it. We can control any layouts, or we can add attributes. So let's go ahead and add an attribute here. Let's first go into edit mode. And we'll open up our reusable attributes. So from here, I can search for any existing reusable attributes within the system, or I can create a new one. But we'll just search for our materials one here. We don't want the first one nor the second one. Okay, this is the material one we want right here. We'll hit OK. And now that material attribute is part of the BOM node 1 node. On the right-hand side there, we see, again, properties for that specific attribute now. We can add any default values. So it'll be a default value, the default material for each of the parts classified under that node. We can control visibility, and we can add constraints. Here is where you may add something like a enumerated value list. So much like we saw with the material attribute earlier, we had a drop down of different choices. So we add that constraint, and now we want to add a global enumeration to it, such as material. So I'll go ahead and add my material there. So if I were to come and classify this part or a part under this node and this attribute, my materials will be there under a drop down. Now, another cool feature here is this auto naming rule. So administrators can come in here and create logic to reflect what the classification or regular attributes are. So a user doesn't have to worry about naming a part. They can fill in their attributes, and the logic will define what the name is depending on what the values of those attributes were. So if I had a length and a material, we can add logic to enforce the values of those attributes to be enforced in the name. So we can have standardization around our names throughout the enterprise. Okay, now that we're finished here, before we transition over to Creo Parametric and take a look at a slightly different use case, let's just jump over here and take a look at our BOMFRIENDS structure, which we can now search from and browse from through the Classification Explorer. Okay, so let's transition over to Creo. Here we're within our embedded browser within Creo. So I can take the role of a design engineer here. And go to my folders, my standard components. Okay, and when I'm displayed with my different WT parts within my folder here, I can go to my Find Similar Objects tool. From here, I can look for any similarities and similar objects that are currently existing in my system. So for this specific WT part here, we have an array of attributes we can run a similar search based off of. We see name, number, material, length. So let's click on our material here. Can insert our value. Now let's add a length value as well. Add some modifiers. So we can do absolute or percentage modifiers from a numeric standpoint. And when we run that search, we can see we get 7 objects that have similarities between those two attributes. So let's go ahead and click on one of these. And we can go to the I button and view information. Once I'm here, I can navigate over to my related objects and take a look in my CAD and related documents and see if there's any CAD associated to this part. So once I'm here, I can quickly open this up, navigate over and add it to my workspace and begin to work on it. Yeah, we can choose from different workspaces, or we can create a new one on the fly, but we're happy with this workspace. So we'll hit OK there, we'll hit OK here. And we'll jump back over to our Creo Parametric session and just quickly open that part up. And from there, we can do work on it. We can make design changes, add it to any assemblies or some assemblies, whatever we may want to do with it as a design engineer. You can see how quickly we got there just by running a classification search. Okay, so just to bring it all back and reiterate some capabilities we saw, the ability to define a classification scheme for parts. We classified parts individually and explored two ways to do it by bulk. We highlighted how quickly it is to search and browse for a component. We built a new structure. We searched for similar parts using our similar object tool, and we explored with auto naming a bit. So that about does it for my session here. That was classification in Windchill, really in a nutshell. Thank you for joining this session. For questions, this is my email here. Thank you.